Hey guys, we're going to look at this really handsome little walnut-handled lion steel knife. This is the Mini and it is designed by Max. How do we know? Because his name is on the blade. Oh yeah, so it's a very small little knife. It's like a 3-finger knife, little liner lock, quite robust with some pretty cool modern features. It's kind of getting towards that little gentleman's knife crossed over with a modern, new ideas, fresh knife. Reminds me of about a quarter of the price version of a Chris Reeve Menandy. So if you like that knife, might be something you could look into if you're not willing to drop that huge amount of money. This one's a liner lock. It locks up very well, as you can see. And it's got overall very good fit and finish, as you would expect from Lion Steel. You see the walnut handles there are attached with Torx screws, which is nice to be able to take the handles off. Often blades like this, you'll find that they are pinned. Not so in this case. So thumb stud is your sort of most obvious method of deployment, which works just fine. It's just on a washer system. But then if you look at that jimping on the back there, that is actually what is a fairly trendy modern front flipper, or maybe not flipper, but frontal jimping deployment system. I don't know. So this is it next to some other knives. You see it is quite a mini knife. That's it next to a full-size Griptilian, which is a large knife, no doubt. And that's it next to a Spidey Chef, which is pretty much the same size. Probably silly of me to choose two knives the same. That's the next to an even bigger knife, so it's about the same size as the handle of a Benchmade Contago. And what do we got next? A Swiss Army knife. We all know what size that is in hand. We'll put one of them below. So as you can see there, it's definitely a little teeny tiny knife. So very much pocketable or belt sheathable. Speaking of which, it comes with this little cool black belt sheath, or just pocket sheath I guess. Has an over loop of leather to make it so you can wear it on your belt, which I did whilst I carried this knife around for review, and the leather does match the little leather lanyard there as well. So that's a completely fine way of carrying what is probably an unstabilized walnut handle, so it should protect the knife from getting too scuffed and beat up. And it sits pretty happily on a belt, not obtrusive whatsoever. It is a very light and small and thin little knife. I will show up the specs on the screen as well. One thing I did notice about this knife is that what often happens with lion steel blades, the factory edge, they go broad convex, really kind of quite a durable convex edge that isn't particularly ultra keen, like as in slicey right there and then. So what I would suggest doing, if you want a good working edge, then it's absolutely fine. But if you are thinking of doing things like slicing, paring, wood carving even, you might want to just dial the edge up a little bit and narrow it out a bit, kind of thick behind the edge. I had the same with my Lion Steel SR2, and I've had the same even with my fixed blade Lion Steel. It's just obviously their taste in how they sell their knives, but I always do prefer to just thin it out a little bit. For the rope cut test, which I did with this blade, I thinned it out to the kitchen knife convex on the workshop, and it did really well. Speaking of the steel, this is 440C steel. So 440C is a classic steel. It's been around forever. It's a cutlery steel made to be in knives. And this one held a really good edge compared to the other example of 440C that I used, I think in the mid-70s. So you're looking at about VG10 levels of steel, N690, all those sorts of sort of mid-level non-powder steels. So no worries at all with this steel for the money. This is about a $75 knife, I think is what my buddy Chris, who lent it to me, paid. Let's see it cut some food. So this is kind of demonstrating that edge a little bit. It cuts the tomato just fine when it's all whole, but the keenness of the edge does sort of start to fail you just a little bit once that strength of the tomato is gone. And it's not standing itself up as well. Like say, I'll cut this again with a Spidey Chef in a second to show you what a really slicey knife, a really thin edge will do. And it's the difference to me was quite apparent. So it's a thicker, beefier working edge that you get with the Lion Steel, and that's fine. It's just that's what you're going to be getting. It's going to make a bit of a mess of stuff if you have to, of the fine stuff. It's going to be a bit of a smasher rather than a slicer. But if you're just going to cut through cardboard all day, it's probably just fine. So this is it cutting an apple. It does okay. It's a little bit of a jagged cut. It's a thin enough blade, but it's still a short little blade. and it's still got that sort of thicker edge, as I said. So no worries at all there. It would do this job just fine, as long as you probably learnt the knife as well, learnt to control it, and learnt to use this if this was going to be your main EDC knife. Just showing it slicing some apple there, doing just fine. This is me taking this is like kind of how I disassemble garlic cloves. So taking off, I thought this is like cutting up some nice Italian tomatoes and garlics and things like that to celebrate the knife's origin, perhaps. I don't know. Cutting up some garlic, this is just kind of how I do it. So overall, 440C on a 2.5-ish inch blade, really lightweight, very sort of flash handle. I really like the look of the wood on this knife. I think it is really dialing in that sort of Chris Reeve Menandy style of knife, modern gentleman's folder, doing really, really well. So the front flipper is cool, it's a cool functionality to have, and it's a really usable, comfortable to use knife, providing you an understanding that it is rather small. They also sell this knife in a D2 variant. In fact, I was pointed out to me by one of my regular commenters that the 440C one isn't really visible in many places anymore. So this might be a secondary market type job if you're after it in the stainless. But overall, really, really cool little comfortable knife that does a lot of things right in terms of being something that feels pretty classic, but also does some nice modern stuff too. Thanks for watching, dudes. I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye now.